today to present my practicum project. My practicum is in Master's in Public Health and Nutrition, and I did my practicum on permanent supportive housing and tobacco support. My name again is Peggy Sarcoma, and there is my student number. So my agenda for today is as follows. I'm going to lightly introduce my project. I'll share with you my design for the project. We'll go over the accomplishments from this project, and then I will offer my recommendations. So a short introduction, the participants for this practicum project were workers and residents in permanent supportive housing within three individual buildings of a larger portfolio. These buildings were termed the acute triangle. They have high rates of chronic homelessness, high rates of comorbidities, high rates of chronic disease, as well as behavioral health and mental health issues. They also have smoking rates for individuals that are way above the Colorado state average of 14%. They come in somewhere at 60% smoking rates. So what we wanted to do for this practicum project was to introduce techniques and best practices around the adoption of the smoke-free policy and the enforcement of the smoke-free policy. So some of the activities we wanted to create with the adoption is we wanted to create this cohesion for staff and residents, making sure that everyone was on the same page and understood why this housing property was adopting a smoke-free policy. And then we wanted to make sure to determine the residents' expectations. What would the residents be required to do as part of this policy implementation? Were they required to stop smoking or simply not smoke indoors and take it outside if they were continuing to smoke? We want to make sure we're sharing this effectively, communicating with the residents so they do understand that they don't have to quit smoking or move because of the policy, that they can actually still live there and just smoke outside. And we want to make sure that everyone understands that this is coming from a trauma-informed care lens. With the enforcement, again, we lead with that trauma-informed care. And then we provided a go-slow process that didn't require the individual to quit, but again, to relocate their smoking event. And then we made sure that we provided person-centered support for individuals if they did find they were ready to quit smoking. The design, we wanted to integrate education opportunities for three pillars: the property managers, the service coordinators, and the residents. We understand that we wanted to implement standards of the implementation process of the smoke-free policy. We wanted to help them work on their announcement of the smoke-free policy, help with the enforcement of the smoke-free policy, and support training for property managers regarding a 5-step enforcement skills workshop, which was provided by the Public Health Department. We wanted to introduce education to the service coordinators. We improved their education and knowledge by offering a training. Public Health offered training in tobacco treatment specialists, which would provide in-depth cessation integration into their enforcement structure, which is just adding tobacco education within their existing structure. But we want to make sure that public health acted as a resource for housing managers to facilitate their smoke-free messaging. And then we offer trainings for the resident service coordinator staff so they could effectively communicate the policy and the cessation requirement and resources available to their residents. They're the individuals that have that one-on-one contact with the resident. And then not to ignore the resident population, we want to make sure that we're providing adequate quit resources, which included individual coaching, and then provided the social norming of taking that smoking event outside and provide relocating training and advocacy for that activity. We want to make sure to follow this enforcement strategy. We trained on how to receive the complaint, how to research the complaint, how to reflect on the complaint that came in and how to respond, and then finally how to report. So just a little unpack these just a little bit. We want to make sure when we receive the complaints that we had set up some sort of structure for the complaint process. How did the resident file the complaint? Was it anonymous? Could they be protected from retaliation? Then we want to provide research for that a property manager on what step maybe this individual was on. They would have to look at past complaints and determine where this individual was. And then after reflecting on where this individual was, they need to determine the most favorable outcome, the action that would institute that most favorable outcome. And then basically with the respond is just making sure you're contacting that individual in an appropriate manner and then just reporting that outcome for future events so you can track where this individual is and protect the sustainability of your smoke-free policy. Some of the accomplishments of this project were improved partnerships between public health and housing, improved understanding of cohesion of the policy and the policy requirements. We introduced the concept of relocating smoking events, which the emphasis was not placed on quitting smoking, creating a framework of sustainability. So this policy would not just be tiger paper, that it could be something that we could count on in the future. And then we introduced cessation support within a non-clinical setting. So providing nicotine replacement therapy and coaching within the process of the housing setting and not in a clinical setting. And then integrate tobacco support and policy education within existing services like their food bank or their Medicaid services or their care coordinator check-ins, all those to include tobacco support. Some of the recommendations moving forward for the property managers, the service coordinators, and the residents were for the property managers to focus on communication, to lead with compassion. Consistency will improve compliance and to continue to monitor to improve the process. For the service coordinators, we highlight education for cessation support. We highlight utilizing those external partnerships to help provide classes or supports that you may not be able to do internally, and integrate tobacco cessation support within existing programs. And then consider to focus on chronic disease management and not strictly tobacco cessation. For the residents, we focus on it's not about quitting. We promote indoor air quality, support individuals to relocate, to report secondhand smoke exposures without retaliation, and then continue to advocate and educate on the dangers of secondhand smoke. Just a couple of recommendations for my university is to remember to consider equity in everything we do. This practicum project was difficult as my first introduction. They dissected my university and what we stood for. It was very difficult. It's very difficult for public health to be in states that may not be conservative states, progressive states that are more liberal. Sometimes our what we put in the media and we put out forth follows the students. So I ask you to consider inclusion in all your politics and remember that we're here for God and not politics. And we all stand behind the principles of God, which is love, freedom, and the free will of choice. So I want to thank everyone involved, especially Dr. Jimenez for my practicum, Sandy Nagler, my practicum coordinator, and my student peer editor, Megan Watts, who was very instrumental in helping me improve and perfect my paper. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate this opportunity to improve my public health education through this master's degree of public health and nutrition.